Hi, I'm Tate Fowler, and this is Crash Course U.S. History. Today we have a very interesting topic on a very special race. Not an ethnic race, not the amazing race, but the space race. Yes, the race to conquer space, the race between the United States and the Soviet Union to develop extraterrestrial technology to get us up into space. Ooh, Mr. Tate, is this the part where I get to meet Steven Spielberg because Star Wars is the best? Oh, me from the past, you have so much yet to learn, like how Star Wars wasn't even directed by Steven Spielberg. But anyway, the space race had a huge impact on the United States, from educational reform to political reform to many more things. You can even say that it brought the United States to infinity and beyond.
Junior.
In August of 1955, the US announced their intent to launch artificial satellites into orbit. Shortly after this, the Soviet Union did the same thing by launching Sputnik into space. Sputnik. Like a potato, right? Did somebody say potato? What's that, Ryan? It's not a potato? And here I thought the Soviet Union made a great contribution to the space race by having a giant potato satellite in orbit. Launched in 1957, Sputnik was the first man-made object sent into space, and it exposed several gaps between the developments of technology and education between the US and the Soviet Union. If the Soviets were able to make a satellite to send into space before the US, then the Soviets could make more powerful missiles than the US and could potentially start a nuclear war. This increased the fear and tension with the Soviet Union and the US. To combat the Soviets' lead in the space race, President Eisenhower created the space program NASA. NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, replaced the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. In 1959, the Soviets launched the first space probe to hit the moon, and in 1961, they sent the first man, Yuri Gagarin, into orbit around Earth. The US was able to make a major comeback in sending the first men to the moon. These men were Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin in the Apollo 11 mission, and they landed on July 20th, 1969. It was from this landing that the famous quote was found: "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind."
Thanks, Tate. Now, while this was all fine and dandy, and the Soviet Union wasn't actually doing anything to harm the United States by developing space programs, the fear of communism was so high in the United States that basically everyone rushed to make improvements to compete. While this was good in theory, such an approach came with problems. Economically, the race for space was a mess. Taxpayers hastily supported funding for space study and exploration, which allowed the government to spend way more money than it should have. Though deficit spending seemed to work in the past, it did nothing but increase the United States' debt this time around. Similarly, military spending increased, which sent the United States even further into the hole. Now, let's take it on over to McKenna to talk politics.
And not just any politics, Carly. We're talking international. When Sputnik was launched, Dwight D. Eisenhower was our president, and he did his very best to... Nope.
Keep going.
And he did his best... Hold on. And he did his best to encourage Americans in the space race. In his farewell address, Eisenhower warned the nation against a military-industrial complex, which addressed the buildup of military and industrial manufacture for war efforts. Bless up! Eisenhower feared that if the United States focused too much on a potential war, then U.S. citizens would witness things fall apart at home. I can tell you now that Okonkwo would not be pleased if this happened. After Eisenhower left the Oval Office, John F. Kennedy took his place. Kennedy was a charismatic and highly competitive man who fully supported the space program. He fully supported aerospace engineer Wernher von Braun when he said, "Don't tell me that man doesn't belong out there. Man belongs wherever he wants to go, and he'll do plenty well when he gets there." In his 1961 State of the Union address, Kennedy even offered to cooperate with the Soviets in space. Khrushchev declined, however, to protect the Soviets' secrets on their space program. And with that, Carly, it's time for the mystery document.
The rules here are simple. I try to guess the author of the mystery document, and if I'm wrong, I get assaulted with Play-Doh. So here we go. This is not science fiction. This is a sober, realistic presentation prepared by leading scientists. I have found this statement so informative and interesting that I wish to share it with all the people of America, and indeed with all the people of the earth. I hope that it can be widely disseminated by all news media, for it clarifies many aspects of space and space technology in a way which can be helpful to all people as the United States proceeds with its peaceful program in space and science exploration. Every person has the opportunity to share through understanding the adventures which lie ahead. This statement of the Science Advisory Committee makes clear the opportunities which a developing space technology can provide to extend man's knowledge of the Earth, the solar system, and the universe. These opportunities reinforce my conviction that we and other nations have a great responsibility to promote the peaceful use of space and to utilize the new knowledge obtainable from space science and technology for the benefit of all mankind. I mean, kind of seems like it'd be like the director of NASA or something, but like, I can't remember his name. But I don't know who else it would be, so that's who I'm gonna go with. What? Dwight D. Eisenhower? Who's even heard of the guy? No, jeez. No. When the space race started, the Soviet Union was still scrambling to adjust to functioning under a communist regime. Most of the people were unsure of how to act, and expressing themselves was certainly out of the question. After all, with the Big Brother state watching their every move with censorship, true American expression was difficult.
Meanwhile, in the United States, the economy thrived, and another consumer culture was on the rise. Exploration in space made this consumer culture even easier to adhere to, with space merchandise becoming more and more popular. The American ideal of manifest destiny had officially expanded beyond terrestrial borders. The entire universe was at their fingertips. Eventually, dreams of driving rocket-powered cars were among the most common visions in American society.
In contrast, in the Soviet Union, citizens were too worried about how they were going to live another day when their agricultural systems were failing. There was not truly time for leisure when the economy was essentially crumbling. However, much later into the space race, the Soviet youth found that they could, in fact, have some of the same social pleasures as the American West. They could dance to rock and roll and jazz. It just needed to pass censorship with the state first. So, in essence, the American and Soviet youth were not that much different. What with the hunt for communists and all, wouldn't you say, McKenna?
Heck yeah, I would!
Thanks, Thought Bubble. The space race left a huge impact on the world. Lyndon B. Johnson made a good point when he said, "If I could get one message to you, it would be this. The future of this country and the welfare of the free world depends upon our success in space. There is no room in this country for any but a fully cooperative, urgently motivated, all-out effort towards space leadership. No one person, no one company, no one government agency has a monopoly on the competence, the missions, or the requirements for the space program." The space race's impact still echoes throughout today through memorable events and technological advances of the 20th century, such as Neil Armstrong landing on the moon and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It being a race, however, would mean there would be a winner. So who really won the space race? Most would declare that the US and NASA won the space race because they were the first to make the lunar landing. However, before the US landed the men on the moon, the Soviets had beat them out in nearly everything else, including first satellite in space and the first man in space. It's really a hard thing to measure, but in the end, that's for you to decide. I'm Tate Fowler. This has been Crash Course US History. Thanks for watching.
Junior.